And welcome everybody. Maria López-Gopar is professor at the Facultad de Idioma at Universidad Autónoma Benito Juárez de Oaxaca, Mexico. Maria's main research interests are intercultural and multilingual education of indigenous peoples in Mexico and decolonizing pedagogies for English language young learners in Mexico. He has received over 15 academic awards. His PhD thesis was awarded the 2009 AERA Second Language Research Dissertation Award and the 2009 OISC Outstanding Thesis of the Year. His articles have appeared in the Journal of Language Education and Identity, Applied Linguistics, ELT Journal, and the International Journal of Multilingualism, among others. He has also published numerous book chapters. His latest books are Decolonizing Primary English Language Teaching and International Perspectives on Critical Pedagogies in ELT. Mario, we're glad you're here. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. You have to apologize. I'm sort of like dealing with a flu, with a cold now. But let me share my screen. Okay. Can everybody see it?
Yes.
Yes, thank you so much. Well, today I'll be talking about learning decolonizing lessons from Indigenous and Afro-Mexican people. And as part of this, first of all, I want to say thank you to the organizers of the African Studies Global Virtual Forum, especially Phoebe, who's been emailing me back and forth and keeping me on track. Thank you, Phoebe. And I know, sort of like, the main responsible for this is Simfrey Makoni for this. So, I always say that if you like my presentation, here is my email. If you don't like it, that's Makoni's email. He's responsible for this, right? I think after this presentation, he will no longer be Simfrey, but Simful, for inviting me in this presentation. So thank you, everyone, for this invitation. I'd like to accomplish three purposes, today. I'm gonna just maybe speak for 30 minutes because I really like to maybe have a longer discussion. I can only stay until 9:30. It's just a change of times. I had planned this for 7 o'clock, but anywho. So I'd like to present how indigenous peoples reposition themselves as multilingual and multiliterally literate individual at the onset of colonial times in the 16th century. And I like to try to convince you that they produce multimodal, multilingual literacy texts. And I like to showcase how indigenous and Afro-Mexican peoples in Oaxaca are at the present time resisting coloniality by working collaboratively in cooperativas and collectives that use multilingual, multiliteracy practice in order to reposition themselves in the world. And also I like to discuss how I want onto the epistemological perspective of an Ayuk speaker, an indigenous language in Mexico, by presenting and then analyzing his life story in connection to their customs that challenges binaries and go beyond humanism. I just want to state for the record that this won't be a theoretical presentation. And the reason why is that I'll try to argue that indigenous peoples and Afro-Mexican people in Mexico, but I think around the world, have really engaged in decolonial practices without really know the term. And without really, they haven't read Mignolo and they don't really care who Mignolo or Dussel and those peoples are, but they do it, from the bottom heart, they got perspective, right? And also, I don't really want to go into controversy as to what decolonial and what decolonial is not, right? I think, especially depending on where we're positioned geopolitically, I think we all experience decolonial practices differently. So I think we need to be open to that. And but I yet again, in the hour that we like to engage in discussion, then maybe we can go into a theoretical discussion as to what we think decolonial practices are, literacy, and any concept you want to engage in conversation. But anywho, so rather than a theoretical presentation, I'd like to show you more sort of like real life examples from what I conceived as anti-colonial practices and resistance by indigenous people and collectives. So just very briefly, I just run the context where I do my research. This is sort of like a Mexican map, and what you see right here in sort of like in different colors are language families. I want you to realize, this is Oaxaca right here on the south part where you see mostly of the little sort of like pebble type things. This is Oaxaca, and in Oaxaca, more than 5 different family languages are spoken. So when you think about family languages, for example, the Romance languages has so many different languages that stem from that: Spanish, Italian, Portuguese, and we can go on and on and on. Well, we have 5 of those families in just one single geographical place, which is the south here in Mexico. And in total, in Mexico, more than 6 million people recognize themselves as indigenous. And in Oaxaca, more than 1 million people speak an indigenous languages. And not very, just at the beginning of the 21st century, by constitution in 2004, indigenous languages and peoples were recognized officially in the constitution. So Spanish is not the official language in Mexico. Indigenous languages and Spanish are considered all national languages, right? However, this is a very, it's a good thing, constitutionally, but they're not really translated into more fair or social practices. And since also I'll be talking about Afro-Mexican people in Mexico, I must say not until, a decade ago, Afro-Mexicans people were really not part of the census, right? People would be asked whether they would consider themselves indigenous, whether they would consider themselves mestizos, but Afro-Mexicans were sort of like under the radar. So invisibilized not only constitutionally, but also from the Mexican society. After, again, many decolonial struggles with already people saying we're doing decolonial fights here, they've fought for that right. So now, as part of the census, people can actually tell, whether they're considered themselves Afro-Mexican or not. So at least we can count them now. And with all the beasts that come with counting, but at least now they're granted ethnic rights similar to indigenous people, which is also a major improvement. So moving on, an essential point, since I'll be talking about indigenous, I think this is sort of like what, from my perspective, defines indigenous. This is from John Larsen. And here we have indigenous peoples, and as soon as anthropologists come in and say, anthropologists, hide everything, because, if they see us with so-called modern things, we will no longer be indigenous. And Linda Smith from New Zealand, sort of the indigenous scholar who has made a great impact in many people's work, she talks about that change appears to be sort of like a white person's privilege, that indigenous people are not really granted the right to change. People are not supposed to change, and same thing for Afro, Mexican people. They have to remain Black if they're to be considered Afro-Mexican. So I just want to point to that fact, because by no means I want to essentialize indigenous peoples, in my work or in what I do. So to accomplish the first objective, let me quickly tell you about Mexican history. Before the 1500, Mexico, similar to Latin America, was a multilingual, multicultural, societies in many places. And in Mexico, of course, there were empires. Let's not romanticize the Mayan, the Aztecs, right? But it was very vibrant, and it was the classic periods in this area. After this, before the invasions, they even had writing systems from different, for different aspects. I know Lynn Mario is here, and he's the one that pointed me that, these literacy practices, went beyond solely the Afro-centric perspective that we have, and that talk a lot more about epistemologies and ontologies, right? So the people who wrote the codices that were part of the the literacy practice engaged were called tlacuilos. And the definition of that is a person who carves wood or stone, a person who writes by painting. So painting, it was very much, part of the literacy practices of that. And, this type of text, had records of history, origin, legends. I sort of put legends in quotations because for me, legends are theories and they provide cosmological information. They're not just something that does not exist. And in these texts, if we want to apply sort of like modern theory to that, we're sort of like multimodal text in the sense that they use different modalities. In the case of Mayas, they started using even syllables for that. So they combine, so like drawings and then syllables and things, and they travel across different languages. That's the concept that Mary Hawkins talked about, modalities, right? So the same codice could be read by someone who spoke a different language, and it could be interpreted that way. And so it went beyond the sort of like alphabetic literacy that can only be read by the people that share the same language. So like what the Chinese language has cleverly done, with the writing system that can be read both by people who speak Mandarin or Cantonese, right? But again, we had the conquest, and this is a very revealing thing, or how the friars started using the same writing systems, then to teach Catholicism in this. And but this is how they conceive, the practices of indigenous peoples. He would write, this is sort of like a diabolical medicine that the Indian doctors used to use. So all these, most of the practices were considered diabolical. So the influence of the church and using the same writing system was, heavily used, heavily practiced by the friars who came to America. And but funny enough, they started to teach, the Indians, how to read and write alphabetically. And and here we have different texts that were developed that you can see they still have the same paintings that the codices have, but on the left side now you have the written in Spanish, in Castellano, and here they translated this text into Nahuatl, applying alphabetic literacy practices in Nahuatl, right? Which is, is very, very interesting, how, different modalities here were used. But yet again, this goes about, mere uses of different modalities, but, it also talks about how they used to bring their own epistemological text. And this happened in a college called Tlatelolco, where they actually were educated. And these Indians, these, multilingual, multiliterate, so like Indian scholars started challenging, the priest, and because they also started to learn Latin with that. And with that, they had access to different texts that talk about rights in the Americas, so they started demanding that. But they actually had a very interesting concept. This is like Nepantla, which has been used by Gloria and Saldúa, which is sort of like this in-betweenness, right? In that case, it's like, don't worry, Father, we're still in Nepantla, like meaning like, we're still between two worlds. But the Nepantla concept, predates the conquest. So it is not simply, by the clash of two worlds that the Indians started to use the concept of Nepantla. They started using the concept of Nepantla way before, thinking that, you don't really have to be, in one circle. You can always be in between, understanding, different genders, different position, different social class, right? So that's a very important concept that I want to use along this presentation because it's a very fluid concept. And I think we can all agree that, especially in decolonial theory, and depending on the geopolitical context, it's a very fluid thing, to do. People have to adjust, on a daily basis as to what it means to be decolonial. So I argue that the New London Group was 500 years late, with their theory about multimodality, thinking that because of technology. Then, we were multimodal. People were, using different modalities 500 years before. And this is my issue with theory, that we think that, when we come up with different theory, then concept exists. I think, my point, and also not making this presentation too theoretical, is saying that things already happened. It's just sometimes we don't have, the theory to explain that, right? So I think, as I was saying with Lynn Mario's work, right, these Eurocentric, graphocentric literacy practices are in place, wrongfully rendering people illiterate, when people, in many ways are using literacy practices from a long time. Here on the right side, we have a WIPIL, which from, you look at it, you can just see address. But when you start talking to the people that produce that, then meaning starts coming up, with full of, all the colors, all the different shapes have meaning, and how even now people, for example, decor churches with this, with flowers and things, again, bringing the codices back into real life. So I think this is the only theoretical quote that I had, and something that I usually use. This is for my good friend Hernandez Amore, who talks about decolonial literacy. And this is how he understands, literacy from a decolonial perspective. Literacy is understood as a fundamental practice of voice for self-authoring one place in the world. Becoming literate is not a simple but a complex process of the appropriation of the socially available meaning and discourse practices indispensable to understanding and shaping one's place in the world. Literate people are not those who code text, but those who use text to decode the world and speak for themselves. So in the rest of my presentation, I'm gonna, instead of going to theory, I'm gonna show you different texts or literacy texts that people have produced historically to illustrate how, in the same way that multilingual and multiliterate people 500 years ago tried to challenge, in that case, the colonial aspect of it, how we are now trying to address, the coloniality aspect that has remained with, the colonial legacy that we have in Mexico and many places in the world. So just very quickly, why I'm gonna tell you through stories. Stories are very, very important to me because I sort of agree with what Brunner says, that we understand and judge the world and its people based on the hypotheses that we develop through our lives. According to Brunner, we develop this by two means, through logic and through stories. And Pennycook and Linda Smith have warned us about the impact that narratives or travelers' tales have had on the way people are constructed as the other, indigenous people, women, and children, among others. As Smith rightly points, the significance of travelers' tales and the adventures is that they represented the other to a general audience back in Europe, which became fixed in the milieu of cultural ideas. Images of cannibal, chief, and the red Indian, the witch doctor, or the tattoo shrunken head and storage, which told of savage and primitivism, generated further interest and therefore further opportunities to represent the other again. So by my idea is that if stories have placed that, significance in the world, then we have to start keeping or telling, our own stories or other people's stories. So I find inspiration in indigenous women and people from different communities who have resisted coloniality and articulate a voice from the margins, or Nepantla, the place where the decolonizing theories that inform my research practices emerge. So from now on, then I'll try to show you just a couple of stories. This is Cooperativa Nueva. It's a cooperative that was formed by widows, and this is how they describe themselves. We are widows, single mothers, older women alone, and young women. In 1996, we formed a cooperative Vida Nueva, New Life. Through our co-op, we are supporting each other in our daily struggles and challenges. In the past, we were badly paid by middlemen, but together, selling directly, we're gaining recognition, respect, and a fair price for our work. This is, I just wanted to point out that this text is originally in English, and the aspect of recognition, resistance, and fair price is their emphasis, right? So yet again, if you ask these women, so you're, doing decolonial work, it's like, what are you talking about? We just want recognition, we just want respect, we just want fair price. So this is where, for me, this is the colonial aspect in their own terms. And they produce, this video that I'm gonna show you. And again, and this was in Spanish with, the help of organization that translated it into English. I hope the sound works. Please let me know. If not, then I'll share it again. Can you hear the sound just to test it? Can you hear the video? Anybody?
Yes, we can hear this.
Yes, okay, thank you.
Pues solamente se le permitía a los empezar a dar el cargo y el trabajo. Todavía la mujer no era tomada en cuenta como ahora. Fuimos el primer grupo de mujeres organizadas dentro de la comunidad independiente. Ya empezamos a pasar la voz, a motivar a otras mujeres y que pertenecer a este grupo. Yo me llamo Pastora Gutiérrez Reyes. Bueno, pues nosotras, lo que es mi abuelita, mi mamá y yo, que tuvimos la idea de crear esta cooperativa de vida nueva. Y empezamos haciendo talleres como bordar, coser ropa, después hacer un poco de repostería, manualidades. Y así fue como fue creciendo nuestro ingreso y empezamos a administrarlo. Entonces empezaron como las críticas. Algunas personas lo tomaron que porque salimos, porque nos reunimos. Muchos decían que como no tienen esposo, como son solas. Pero entre todas nosotras nos dimos ánimo, nos apoyábamos, nos consolábamos y nos fortalecíamos unas a otras con palabras, ya que también era más grande la necesidad que teníamos de salir adelante. Cada mujer de la cooperativa ha cambiado su vida. Algunas otras, pues han invertido, ¿no? Sus ganancias en poner un puesto de frutas, tienda de abarrotes, y otras han enviado a sus niños a la escuela. Esos talleres nos ayudaron a hacer más conciencia. Como comenté al principio, nos dieron mucho más fuerza, nos dieron seguridad, nos dieron valor. Puede conseguir avanzar hacia adelante y ganarse el respeto y el reconocimiento de tu autoridad, de tu gente, de tu pueblo, con trabajo, con mucho trabajo, con esfuerzo, ¿no?
Great. Now, this presentation is also about, Afro-Mexican people, in Mexico. And as you know, as part of the Atlantic Circle that Miolo talks about, that started capitalism, really, the origin of capitalism, also African, people were brought into the Americas as slaves. And as I said at the beginning of the presentation, they have are now gained the constitutional recognition of that, and they have struggled. And I think artists are doing a much powerful work. This is Maria Bertencia Lírica, a rapist that studied in our BA program, and this is how she fights the indigenous Afro-Mexican people, fight. So let me play a video of that.
Entre tantas etapas del que como yo digo las trabajando que empiezan igual y tan diferente a nosotros y como mayoría es sobre la misma cosa. En nuestra historia hemos usado y lo seguimos viendo ahora. La voz la cogieron otras bocas con ganas de volar, pero con las alas rotas nos hacemos libres, pero vivimos de rodillas, maquillamos en tonos rosas nuestras heridas, sin respeto ni dignidad en nuestras vidas, por eso es que nuestra lucha aún no termina. Supe que es la violencia y vi también lo que el respeto cuesta, pero significa. ¿Y tú qué esperas? Yo no quiero esperar ni por mí ni por la mía, ni ser nada más. A la que derriba, oyendo la voz contra toda esa mentira y te invito, mujer, a poner el tuyo arriba.
So anyway, this was your Spanish input for the day, for the month maybe. And at the first part of the song was translated, right? And I debated as to whether putting the whole translation. And but I think it's also important that we immerse ourselves and be in this idea, like why I'm not understanding this, because we think it's just oral languages are the one we understand. And I think the video in itself has more powerful imagery on that. And the reason I want to show this too is that we really need to think about academia when we do things. This video, which is not very old, has been seen like 20,000, 30,000 times. I checked my videos, that I posted on YouTube, and they have 300 views compared to 20,000, right? You may say, well, nobody knows you, but I've checked other, morely, known academics, and our work is not really seen as much. So what I'm trying to say is that the way that people have appropriated or fought against injustices, in this case gender, and the things that women are facing across the world, not just in Mexico, but in many places where are not recognized, is more powerfully addressed by artists in many ways, and is more highly seen. So I think we can learn a lot from them as to what is it that we are doing when we're producing books and chapters that not many people read, or only the people in the like academic circles that we usually speak to, then read, and not the rest of the people. But other artists are doing a much better job. So just almost, to start wrapping this presentation, I want to introduce you to Jose Angel, an indigenous polyglot. He's from a Juk community mostly called Mije, one of the indigenous groups. And Mijes have been, they've argued that they were not conquered by the Spaniards because they usually lived in high up in the mountains. So, they usually tell we're the unconquered people. But because of that, also they have struggled with issues, especially with capitalism, arriving in their community with poverty. And now the word mije equates stupid. So young people in elementary schools, they call each other, don't be a mije. So like, don't be stupid. So through these life stories that we collected, Jose Angel, he was a student teacher in our program. He graduated speaking Ayuk in Spanish, English, and also Italian. He was born in an Ayuk community, but he, like many indigenous people, has lived a very migratory life. He has moved like 3, 4, like 6, 7 times to continue studying. And he was educated, for example, in a boarding school as a teenager with priests. But the main thing I want to tell you about is, his grandfather and his Ayuk family, because he was raised by them and he learned Mije from his grandparents who do not speak Spanish. And they have what they call costumbres, their customs, and they say. And so the word costumbre is used by Ayuk people to refer to different practices and rituals performed mostly in Ayuk language for celebrating life, hunting, fishing, medicinal purpose, community organization, and settling dispute, just to mention a few. So Ayuk people really connect with different elements of the land. And here, Jose Angel tells us a story as to, what happens when someone gets scared. So I'm gonna let you read it. So, this whole information can sink in. So if you can read this part, and I'll join with you. So after reading this got published in one of Marconi's Epistemologies of the South. But I think in these stories are challenging many things. To begin with, based on Christian, beliefs, rivers, stones, they had no souls. It was sort of like a human that had souls. And with Ayuk people, they said like, wait a minute, you can speak to the river, I know Limario has faced this thing with his research as to, with the people that he has worked, that they engage in these journeys that make people, you have to get high in order to speak to other elements of the world. So these challenges, not only, cognition, but also who do we engage with, in dialogue? Is it just humans that engage in dialogue? Is it just animals that it's only engage in communication, or do we actually engage in communication with the land of this? And so these are Ayuk people saying that, you tell the river, give me back my piece of soul and I'll give you back your petal, that is part of yours. Then it starts, blurring, different dichotomies on that. And, and I know some people have, Penny Cook and other people talking about post-humanism, right? But also the very, very powerful work of Kelly Tuohy, really, really bringing indigenous new materialism theories, then is speaking to that. But again, it is not because Penny Cook is talking about post-humanism, or that because, now we have new materialism theories. People have done this from a long time ago, but we haven't really, we have sort of like been deaf on this. And just want to finish this with another, Angel stories with his grandfather. Says, my grandfather is the most respectful person I know, showing respect to the land. For example, when we went fishing to the river with my grandparents, my father performed la costumbre, the custom. He would bring a chicken, a hen, or a rooster, and he would offer the blood to the water. He would break some eggs in the water and would give the river some mezcal, an alcoholic drink made of agave cactus. He would then pray, ask for permission so that we did fine. so that the river could give us permission and we would not face any dangers. These prayers are not in Spanish or Hail Mary or those prayers. They are prayers in Ayuk. Well, they're not prayers as such, they're like offerings. Ayuk people speak to the land, Nash, to the Wimpog, and they tell, Betak Nash, Mother Air, I brought you what I have to offer. Please keep me safe. What I'm fishing is to eat and not to profit. Yet again, if we had this type of respect, to the land that Ayuk people have been, they've had for centuries, then I think we'll be facing, not the global issues that we are dealing with at the moment. When we harvest, when we, destroy the land for profit purposes and not really just for survival. And Jose Angel's future plans, he says he will visit his town with his grandparents, will always remember where he comes from, who he is, and is ready to share his customs and belief. And I think this is the spirit and that I want to leave in this part of the presentation. Jose Angel in the river that he respects. But, it is when we start sharing these people customs and beliefs that I think will start turning, the way we see things. So just to conclude, decolonizing practices, I argue, are part of other people's daily lives. Decolonizing practices are about recognition and respect. For example, the work of Bonnie Norton has been very powerful. It is about identity. It is about ontologies that, people really want to be respected in who they are. And once we move away from Eurocentric ideologies and theories, we will start understanding about learning and from other ontologies and epistemologies. So I argue that academia must learn from these practices. So, I have to, just to conclude, if I've convinced you that Mexican indigenous women are intelligent, creative, and decolonizers, I achieved my purpose. If not, I publicly apologize to these women since I failed to portray them as they really are. Muchas gracias.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Profe López-Gopar.
Gracias.
We'll first start with some questions from Prof. Makoni to start, and others feel free to write any questions in the chat or raise your hand, and we'll get to you in the queue.
Okay. Thank you very much for this moving presentation. I would like to help. This is an open invitation to you to help me clarify a couple of things. When you are using stories, are stories, do you, in your analysis, are stories a different form of analysis, or do you see stories as a type of analysis? Or do you see stories and analysis as binary opposites, or what? If you were teaching a course on research methods, for example, would you say that stories are one way of analyzing and presenting your data, or how do you handle that?
Yeah, that's a very important work. Well, let me first, start, maybe telling how I do it with my students.
Yes.
The first thing is that we challenge, the notion of story, right?
Okay.
Because at times we think of story just as a movie or a book, or so it has to be complete, right? And the way we do it is that we keep telling stories on a daily basis. A simple sentence can be a story in itself.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
And I know that, for example, people, go between stories and narrative, right?
Yes.
And so when does a story, end, and when does narrative, begin, right? And so we've also struggled with that, conceptually, and I say we because I work with my colleague, William Shugru, on this, who does a lot of autoethnographic work. And so anywho, for me, this, to begin with, this YouTube song is a story in itself.
Okay.
I see it, I see that as a story, right? As to how, for example, in this video, multiple stories are told, right? As I said at the beginning, like, for example, in the first part, there were English translation texts on that, right? But then, the second part of the video, it was usually in Spanish, right?
Mm.
For some people may have maybe tuned out and say like, well, I don't understand anything, right? But then sort of like that forced us into, listening to the other stories that we were told, right? For example, in the video, different type of women were portrayed, transgender people were portrayed, and for me, those are stories, right?
Yes,
So I think, trying to, get at your question that maybe I'm not providing an answer with, I think it is, I agree with Fabian saying that, at times, we don't collect data, right? But we co-construct data, right? So I think, our picking and choosing of stories and what we're going to use to tell those are in itself an analysis, right?
Yes.
I think we are surrounded, if sort of like you accept my view of stories, then, a headline, newspaper headline, someone that tells you, like a mannerism that someone does, that's a story in itself. If you're walking down the street and someone changes, sidewalks because they want to face you, that's sort of like a story in the happening, right? So, and what I'm trying to get at is that once we write an article and we select stories thinking from so-called emerging themes, right? We are picking and choosing stories to sort of construct a narrative, if you call, to tell a grander story. I don't know whether it makes sense. So like an article being a story, or the chapters that we produce for you, right? So like we put some study together so that, our story was told. And another thing that I like about Brunner's view of stories, he argues that stories are in itself political, right? That they have an intention, right? And same thing with language, for example, the New London Group, one of the key concepts that they argue is that language is always interested, right? So we always have an agenda as the we're trying to tell, whether it's to convince, whether it's to manipulate, whether it's to show care for some people. So by picking and choosing and putting stories together, we have an agenda, your own producing your books. I see, for example, the books of the Epistemologies of the South, or I don't remember the title, right? As a collection of multiple stories, right? That are that have an agenda before, right? So I think they're, just to sum up, they're extrinsically related, right? The analysis and picking and choosing the story and how we want to tell them and how we want to portray them, right? Then it is that. Because the same story that I put with Jose Angel perspective, or, talking to the river, may be told by someone who says like, look at what these people believe, this is what Christianity did for them, so they can move away from these odd beliefs that they had. You see what I'm saying? The same thing could then be used against them, to show them that, this is what Christianity did for them, for that.
Thank you very much for this. Let me continue with this conversation, but I'm going to use a concept that I've been playing around with some of my colleagues who are on this call, Magda, Tanya, etc., which to some extent intersects with what you are talking about, what we are calling now unbooking. And what I found interesting in your presentation is you were showing how some of these texts were multilingual, bilingual, transmodal, etc. And I think this Tanya, who is on this call, she can jump in and explain. I think she can explain more effectively than I can. That one way in which we are talking about unbooking is to try and put up an argument for transmodal, in quotes, books, multilingual, bilingual books, because we are arguing that the notion of a book as an artifact is inadequate to capture our experiences. So when I saw the examples that you were citing, whether this transmodal text and all this, that really gave me a good example of what I think, amongst other factors is what we are currently referring to as unbooking.
Yeah.
Magda, do you want to jump in? Mhm.
Thank you, Makoni, for inviting me and Tanya to join your question.
Mhm.
Yeah, so unbooking it has nothing to do with canceling a reservation. It's it's thinking differently about doing books together, right? So also it's a part of it is challenging the formal style of writing and telling a story, which might be not academic enough, or deciding who's the first author, who is and who goes et al, right?
No.
So there are many issues that we can absolutely we get now inspiration from your presentation. So I don't know, Tanya, if you want to.
Yeah. Tanya, do you want to jump in?
Oh yeah, thank you. Yes, this is really inspiring for us. Because we've been thinking about valuing diverse knowledges, and valuing oral knowledges, and how these have always been excluded from academic writing. So we've been thinking about the process of how knowledge is conveyed and in a multimodal, multilingual, translingual way. So this is very, very inspiring to see those images that you showed us. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. I attended OISI, which is only considered the place to get a PhD in Canada, right? And I remember in one of the restrooms there was this quote, and written on one of the boards. It says, "The secret realization that more people will read this than my thesis." And that's stuck with me so much, because I think I love the concept, because I think the booking thing is very restrictive. It's packaged, right? But once we open it up, then other things can happen. I think we're still we're moving a little bit with academia, as to trying to insert videos or oral things into perspective that starts bringing all other knowledges in this way. I like this, Maggie Hawkins' perspective on transmodality, in the sense of saying that these multimodal texts, or whatever you want to call them, then for example, the video of the rapist was produced maybe with her idea of with a Mexican audience, right? And yet again, you have here an audience of African scholars or so-called decolonial scholars around the world, maybe watching this video for the first time, and the author is not here maybe to tell you what her meaning was, and trying to understand, and then you create your own meanings with that, right? From a basic literacy perspective, then I think we've all agreed for a long time that meaning does not reside in the text itself, right? Even from a very, very graphocentric perspective, right? That's meaning is in the negotiation between the reader and the author, right? But what Maggie has argued that what's happening here, that in many different texts that are circulating, we no longer know who the author is, right? That is, many memes and videos are out there, right? Are put out there, and we have to make meaning out of it, right? But again, I think our unbooking, if I may borrow your concept, right, has to also have an agenda, right? And this is why I think the decolonial aspect has a political sense. We have to take a stance, for better or for worse, right? We have to take a political sense, because it is about taking a stance. Even as to how we tell these stories, the way we portray them, the way we use them, right? Many people, I remember you also asking about the appropriation of knowledge, right? Of how data can be extracted and then just taken away. So what I'm trying to do is that many times is bringing people as co-authors, right? But yeah, I think with academia we're still very much restricted by books and articles that we need to start challenging.
Was in unbooking, I want to stop and then hand over to Some of my colleagues will know more about this than I do. In unbooking, one of the key arguments that what is becoming apparent to us is that it doesn't really matter how radical the scholarship is going to be. It doesn't, let me put it more frank, it doesn't matter how radical Minolo scholarship can be, as long as it is written in a form of a book, it is constrained by the artifact of a book. Because a book imposes certain ontological approaches that you have to adopt towards how you handle knowledge. Right. Sure. So the need to then begin to unravel the underlying basis on which that knowledge is going to be built. Let me get to Lynn Mario, who knows more about this than I will ever do. Lynn, nice seeing you. Nice seeing you.
Hola, Lynn. Good to see you.
Listen, again, you're putting me on the spot, but let's. Yeah, but I think this is extremely interesting. The unbooking is important, but I think it clashes, Sinfrey, with one of the questions, your initial questions to Mario, which was about methodology. I think we have to unbook methodology. Because methodology is still within a colonial epistemology of science, right? And a colonial ontology of what knowledge and science is, right? And well, methodology comes from the Western concept of science. And with that, we have all of these things like the subject can only be human because the subject has to be rational. We have the idea of abstraction.
It has to give permission in the ethic boards, right?
Yep. Nothing more colonial than the ethic boards, right?
The boards, for sure.
And the important thing about methodology is the concept of abstraction, which is what science is based on. Abstraction meaning removal from context, taking a natural phenomenon into a laboratory environment to be able to study it. And then it's cut up and then, it's segmented and resegmented and desegmented and whatever. So all of these things are historically behind what we have inherited academically as methodology. So, in my university, in my department, I have this ongoing battle with methodology. I don't allow my PhD students to even use the term methodology or write a chapter on methodology. They can call it narrative, or they can call it the construction of knowledge, right? But the important thing there is you are, as Mario reminded us, the idea of the interestedness in knowledge construction, right? Or the importance of understanding where we are always speaking from. We are always speaking from somewhere. That colors our knowledge production. And that idea of location, speaking from somewhere, and contextualization is all connected to the idea that Mario, you raised this in the concept of Nepantla, right? In-betweenness. The in-betweenness is not, the way Homi Bhabha was interpreted when he used the word hybrid. In-betweenness is not the production of something, an end product in between, a hybrid. In-betweenness is a movement, a constant movement, right? It's dynamic. It cannot be stopped. And what literacy, alphabetic literacy, tended to do is to freeze this, congeal this dynamicity. So we have, Mario, you must be familiar with, besides Nepantla, what's her name? Sylvia Rivera Cusicanqui.
Yeah, Cusicanqui, of course,
Cheche, right? Cheche in Aymara. Or in Brazil, the Brazilian Quilombo thinker, Antonio Bispo dos Santos uses the word transfluencia, transfluence. So all of these things in between movement, it is the connection between the human and the land. Right? So it's not an ontology of separateness or separability. So I am only I if the land is the land, right? Because my sustenance comes from the land or from other elements of nature. So this interconnectivity, which becomes lost in when we talk about books between two covers. So as if they're not.
Yeah. It's interesting you're saying that. This is very interesting because to some extent, Magda again and Tanya can jump in. In unbooking, for example, we have we don't talk of chapters, we talk of installments. We also talk of, there is a section that deals with methodologically undoing. I can't remember whether it's Magda or Tanya. You are the ones who were leading that particular aspect of methodologically undoing, which links up very much with what Lynn Mario, what we were talking about. In methodologically undoing, what we are trying to do, amongst other things, is to challenge the tendency to deify methodologies in this particular aspects. And I think Lewis Gordon puts it very neatly that what tends to happen is that methodologies which are supposed to be used to analyze the world become the world themselves. Right.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
So, they begin to assume a universe in themselves. And scholarship becomes an exercise in clerical clerical work. How good you are able to do this, rather than why you are doing this. Right? For sure. This is not
an exercise of power. Right?
It is.
It has political implications.
I wanted to actually to add something, Macaulay, to what you said, and that's also a question for Mario, just following up on that, the question of anonymity, right, that you've been, because in your presentation you used, I think that Jose Angel, it's the real name.
Yeah, it is,
blur his face, and that's the issues, right, Tanya, that we've been dealing in the installment of undoing methodology is who really wants to anonymize the participants, because oftentimes they say, no, please use my name, but still I have to hide the name, a pseudonym, and hide it on a cloud so nobody can access this.
And part of my own ethics is that I tell the stories of people who want their stories to be told, right? With Jose Angel, he was my student. He knew that his story will be shared, in books. We wrote a story together. Right. So the issue of, here you have, even in this Western methodology, right, you have, even you develop concepts, like, for example, member checking, right? Again, which is sort of like cutting edge, but a little bit still problematic, right? You check with the members to see whether you're portraying him, the way he or she wants to be portrayed, right? But I think, especially in my case, once people understand, the genuine interest that I have in their stories to learn from them, and that other people have to, learn from them as well, then it becomes, sure, let's start telling, this to the world, Here are some photos that you can put in, that's his real grandfather, right? And for me, that's the ethics of the Solec Ethic Board, this trust, this, what is this person going to do with my stories? How is it going to portray me, right? So, well, at least, make them a co-author. And then, so like have them also be part of the, the writing process, as to, so like the whatever is told about them is true, right? Because Linda Smith, has also said that books are dangerous, right? because they usually tell stories, based on what people want to tell about you. And many times those stories are not true, or they're manipulated to tell a story in a certain way, right? So going back to the interest of languages, as Limari was saying, it's about power. It is about knowledge construction. It is about, for example, if this presentation, again, was not theoretical, was not methodological, And you could have just, maybe disregarded us. What is this guy talking about? Who is he basing, his, work on, or what type of method he used for this, right? And again, we're full of stories around, and so we pick and choose. That's part of our analysis too. There's so many millions of stories out there that are picking and choosing. Then is what and our agenda behind. Then I think that makes it powerful. So I like the way that Mario said that it is about at least tell people how you chose them, why you chose them. So you're rational, not from a very simplistic way as to show me what your rationale was this for selecting your participants, right? No, at least tell me how you collect them, where you got them from. Do you talk to the people? That is this sort of like something you pick from the internet, which is fine too. Because we're bombarded now with fake news and things that I think we still need to then negotiate meaning with that, right? But I think and then I think someone was having a question. For me, I think the most important thing is about the issue that we have to tell stories back. That's sort of like a way of resistance, right? No matter if it's from a sort of like put together in a book, in a presentation, in the way we approach people on the subway, right? Those are ideas, giving an sort of like a pep talk to a grad student, right? That in itself has, powerful agendas, for that.
Okay.
All right. Thank you so much. I'll start with a chat comment from Nick Farah class. So he says, during the past 2 sessions, we have been looking at national constitutions, and we have left those sessions with a sense of not knowing where to start in trying to reverse the violence of coloniality. But your presentation, Mario, suggests points of reference that have to do with what Indigenous peoples often call sovereignty, which includes sovereign epistemes, not as a prescriptive roadmap, but as a rudder in navigating unpredictable waters, as well as a reminder that, as you so rightly say, these sovereignties are very old and we do not have to start from ground zero. So I don't know if you want to comment on that at all. Okay.
No, that's a fantastic writer. It's almost like poetry, right? Right? Fantastic.
And then we have a question from Mari. Go ahead.
Yeah, Mari.
Hi, Mario. Thank you.
Hi, Mari.
Wonderful presentation. So I agree with the discussion that's been happening about the institutional review board and challenging the construct of the story. But I wonder if we go back to epistemology of the South and the notion that Santos proposed, the ecology of knowledges, that diverse knowledges should be values, which can be interpreted as, Western knowledge has a place as well as Indigenous knowledge and no hegemonic knowledge. And I have some reservation about 100% just trashing, removing, totally criticizing methodology, having taught a graduate level methodology course over 20 years.
Yeah, for sure,
So I understand the criticism, but you yourself using a critical action research project, and you mentioned materialism, right?
Yeah.
For example, Killing Tui's work is very, Western based, but she doesn't want to. So my question is, it's not so much about unbooking or undoing methodology, but being aware of pitfalls of it and be conscious to engage with research practice yourself. Indigenous or sovereign epistemes at Nick Farless. So if we are talking undoing or unbooking, we sort of ended up moving into binary. Which do we not want to avoid that? I mean, like, the unbooking project is really wonderful. And I also wanted to mention just briefly, as a OEZ graduate myself too. Sort of booking project in dissertation at OEZ, for example, using different fonts, including video links and all sorts of things. And PSU, there has been a dissertation that's done graphic novel form.
Yeah.
Has been some innovation, but I agree with the sentiment that not many people live academic texts.
Yes. Yeah. If I can comment to that, I totally agree with you that, and I think I go back to, to the issue of, trying to tell the story, right? So for example, if you're publishing in a specific journal and you think that that's the best venue and that your story will reach out, a wider audience with that, and you have to include a methodology piece, then, you do it, right? It's, what your intention is about. But as you rightly point out, I think it's like many of the students, for example, the PhD candidates at many different places, right? There'll be questions about their methodology choices in things and how, this is knowledge thing, right? So I think, in many ways, I was just listening to Mignolo, this morning, again, as to, how we bring ideas, right? So like, oh, I haven't read, Mignolo, and lately maybe I should listen to a book. And he's saying that, and he was making the case that, if you want to criticize Marxism, you have to know Marxism, right? Being able to criticize it as also like a Western, conception, right? So same thing with methodology, right? We cannot just simply say, oh, methodology is out of the trash, right? But once you really understand how methodology works and sort of like the Western concepts of it, right? Then you can, you add a better standpoint to say like, this is not what I use this, right? In my case, for example, using critical ethnographic action research, right? I use, for example, ethnography, but I knew, after reading Linda Smith's work, the dangers of doing ethnography, right? That, was sort of like the qualitative research par excellence. But if you didn't really engage ethnography critically, then you will be replicating other people's tales and be representing other people's that, right? The same thing with action research, right? If you didn't take it from a critical perspective, sort of like a false border perspective of really, really engaging with people and really, really understanding what people, wanted to do, then we're replicating again, one thing that, if something is wrong, then you sort of like intervene in that and you make it right and then make it better, right? And so like by bringing those together, my point was that you can never, separate that, right? That you're always, even I tell my students, be careful with what you ask a person because, your questions may lead that person to think that way. That person was okay before your question, right? There are, because many people criticize the leading question, right? I think no matter what question you ask, you're leading that person is because you're zooming whatever they were thinking to your own perspective. And we have to be very, very mindful of that, right? So I think it is important then to talk about, for example, conducting interviews, right? And how it is about, for example, interviews from a Val perspective, right? The inter in between, that, it is two people's perspectives coming together, right? This is also why I like, in Fabian's notion of, we don't collect data, we co-construct data, right? Because when we engage people in conversation, when we ask them to tell a story, right? You're co-constructing the thing right there, right? It is not so-called real story, but, I love Gabriel Garcia Marquez. It is sort of like a Nobel Prize winner in Latin American writer. And he had a book called His Life. And he says, like, life is not what we lived, but how we remember it to tell it, right? And then again, it's like his own remembrance of how his life was that, he was telling the world, right? Based on that, right? So yet again, I think, methodology, especially to challenge it, has to be taught, but then from a critical perspective, right? Again, Linda Smith does a very, very powerful work as to saying that don't bring me the collaborative narrative of research when you bring your own, objectives, right at the get-go, without really knowing us. That's not really a collaborative way to work with people. Come and meet me first, right? Mario talked about Kusakanki from Bolivia, and one of my friends from OISI went to talk to her. He said, like, I was ready to talk to her and have these wonderful discussions about the colonial, and she gave me a shovel and said, like, work with the land first. We can talk later, right? It's like, try to work with the land, and then we can talk about whatever you want. Trying to position that fellow, from this, like, just, ground yourself into what I'm doing, into what people do on a daily basis, so you can understand where I come from, right? And maybe you can reconcile what you come from and how you is it that you want to talk about things. Thank you, Mary.
Thank you. I see Oyeronke's hand and then Tanya. So Oyeronke, go ahead.
Greetings, everyone.
Greetings.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Thank you so much for that wonderful presentation. And I've been learning very much from the reactions and the reactions. I noticed that from the very beginning of your presentation, and this kept coming up again, you talked about practices that people have been engaged in before the conquest. And even the concept of Nepandla is a very old one. So my question is this: on what basis then do we subsume these practices under the concept of decolonial? I have misgivings about the ubiquitous way in which decolonial is just thrown around. It's everywhere. And whenever I hear anything with colonial in it, whether it's decolonial, recolonial, colonial, for me, it reinscribes Eurocentrism. So if we say that Nepandla is decolonial, then it takes the sovereignty of our practice. I'm not saying that people shouldn't use decolonial. Be very specific and very narrow. And our everyday practices cannot just be looked at and say, oh, this is decolonial, this is decolonial, because it always brings Europe into it. Because people are just doing their own stuff too.
Yeah, for sure.
So please, would you speak to that?
Yeah.
Thank you.
As I try to make it clear, but as I said, I think in one of the parts of the presentation, right? So like this decolonial lens is the one that we bring in this, right? If you ask, the Rapes, if you ask, the people, the Tlaquilos back in the day, 500 years ago, if you ask, Jose Angel, oh, so you're doing decolonial things. What are you talking about? I just do what I do, right? People have been engaged in these practices, right, without really, thinking of this. However, having said that, right, I think colonialism was a real thing, is a real thing, in many ways for many people who have to deal with, for example, foreign companies coming into the territory about fair price and things, right? That's the real thing, that they engage with in a daily life, right? And for many of those people, it's like, just show me some goddamn respect, give me the recognition of who I am, don't take me as a fool thing, right? That for them is what they do on a daily basis, right? They don't put, like theoretical concepts as to what they do. Some of them do. Let's say that, depending on whether they're being so-called educated, on these constructs, right? But the majority of the people, I remember, Mare was one of my students, right? And in one of the interviews, he said, like, many people, call me a feminist. He said, I don't know whether I'm a feminist. I just write rap, right? If you think my lyrics are feminist, then yeah. But you put the label to that, right? So same thing, you could actually then, ask, Mare, say like, so you're doing decolonial writing and practice and thing. Yeah, if you say so, sure, that's your thing, not my thing. But yeah, I want, respect for women. I want people's validation. I want you to understand, the suffering that women go through, the exploitation that go through, the violence they're facing on a daily basis. That's what I'm gonna be about, right? So I think, if we want to at least then use this for sort of book, I think this is what decolonial is about for people, right? And this is what decolonial means to them. That I think is the most important thing.
Thank you so much. Tanya, go ahead.
Hi, thank you so much. Yeah, this is so fascinating. Thank you for all these concepts. And I was so interested, particularly in the literacy angle, because I work with adults who have grown up orally. And so I'm interested in what happens with trying to value all these practices and tell people who are in that situation, when these people move out of that context, refugees, and they end up living in a print-centered context, for example, where their oral ways, their practices, and all these wonderful aspects of their lives that we've been talking about are not valued in the society in general. We're trying to value them and trying to encourage them to value them themselves in their new context. So you're sort of in this dilemma because they themselves feel this need to change their practices,
for sure.
and learn the dominant language and learn to write in that dominant language. And so I've been trying to encourage this multimodality, translingual writing, all of these things for people who want to learn print, to start using print. But from their perspective, they see that as just a stepping stone in order to write in the dominant language in alphabetic print. So we're kind of in this dilemma because then we're like, all the theories come in and we're thinking, well, we want to do co-construction of knowledge with these people. So what do we do about two things? Do we deny the fact that they have these practical needs? We don't want to do that, but we don't want to devalue their practices. But also regarding the theoretical element, we're trying to co-construct this knowledge. How do we do that without trying to sort of enforce these theories upon people when they may not see their practices in that way? It's kind of an ongoing cycle.
It is.
That knowledge together. I just wondered what you thought about that.
Yeah, I've struggled with that, and same thing with critical research or whatever, critical ethnography, right? Kelly Tuhi, has been referred to. I remember her line. It's a very fine line, into sort of like an imposition of your own ideas and right in respect of that. I think I usually work with children, and this is sort of the area of my work. It is about showing genuine care and being genuine as to what you believe, right? But again, not trying to impose yourself as to what they believe, what you believe, or they want to believe, right? And this is sort of brings back to like Fals Borda's work, back in the 70s. It's like you really have to then tell people what they want to do, right? And then because, for example, with children, right? In elementary school, it is like, yeah, well, we like indigenous languages. It's important, use it, and then use it in the classroom and things, right? This elementary school. When they go to middle school, they're discriminated against, or the teacher, tells them, why are you doing that? That's not, the language in the classroom, right? I often tell my student teachers, maybe they're looking for us, right? It's like, where is that sucker that told me to use indigenous languages, right? Because I want to tell him that, maybe he shouldn't have told me that, right? So I think, at the end of the day, Tanya, I think we're messing with people's lives. And at least we have to be transparent as to why is it that we do, why we think that we do. and then be open to that. For me, that's the ethical perspective as to that, right? So I think it's like, share with them, this is what I believe, and this is, in the past, people did not or are still not consider oral tradition, as valid. I think you do. For example, when you think about it, we think that it's all about print, right? But Obama had not become the president of the US, I'm sure, if he had not been a great speaker. It's still about the orality aspect of it is still there. People still looking for eloquent, speakers that, can engage an audience, right? Who people that speak their own ways, who, tell them what they want to hear, right? So orality has a major impact of it, rather than what people write, or now, for example, the media, right, with tweets and things, is still very powerful rather than writing a whole thing. In Mexico, we're dreading that Trump is going to become the president of the US again, because every time that Trump tweeted something, the peso devalued, sometimes like 5 or 10%, and that was real. That was not invented. That was the power of this guy's tweets. I'm going to close the border, tomorrow. It's like, then the whole economy collapsed based on that tweet, right? So just trying to go back to to talking to people about it. I think we need to be strategic to show them how orality is still a major aspect in this, and not just them, how short texts or even just an image is more powerful. How many books, for example, have been written again in slam, right? But you may remember, for example, the cartoons that were drawn against Islam, remember, in Denmark, was it? That created a whole world, thing as to with just the cartoons against Islam, right? So, drawings, images are still very, very powerful in our case. So we just need to remind people that, this is still the fact. And it is not just basically convincing them as to what is best for them, right? I think.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tony.
Thank you so much. I want to be mindful of the time as well.
Yeah.
So I think we'll take our last question for the recorded part from Salakoko quickly, and then we'll get some concluding thoughts from Makoni and transition to our after party. So Salakoko, go ahead. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. This has been quite an impressive session, learning a lot. I'd like to start by thanking Lynn Mario for clarifying what he meant by unbooking methodology. The clarification is really very useful as part of decolonizing knowledge. And Mario, there are 2 points. One is that you said the person presenting things orally to a live audience becomes more effective than the scholar publishing in the traditional way in academic journals or books. Is the difference lies in the market. And what we have to highlight there is that the oral presentation is in the vernacular of the people. And the oral presentation takes advantage of technology because that presents a larger audience, not the traditional kind of audience, because if I talk just to 10 people, that's less effective than a scholar publishing in a journal and so forth. The second point is, I'm sorry, I want to say something else about the first point. Cecile Vigouroux and I raised the question about economists influencing governments on methods of language more than linguists do. And I think part of it has to do with how we package the information about our findings and so forth. And the people that come the closest to impacting governments are people in applied linguistics, not people in theoretical linguistics and so forth. It's a different world of its own. And for that, for applied linguists to be more effective, they have to be more engaging with governance and package knowledge in the language that people in the governance of nations
for sure
can digest easily. And there's something about how we write and how we communicate that is very relevant. But the thing that I took mostly to heart, I'm sorry I joined just 10 minutes later, I was walking my dog, is the sense of emancipation, not just in the construction of knowledge, but emancipation in our actions, in our behavior. That's where we can really show the significance of decoloniality, because what has happened under colonialism is the erasure of a lot of indigenous practices, the marginalization of a lot of practices and so forth. Sure, we are not going to go back to the old world, because what culture is always evolving, and culture is always hybridizing out of context. But we have to be carefully selective in the kinds of things that we do, and where we think that our connection with nature should go back to our traditions, that there is something in traditional medicine that is worth preserving or maintaining or developing further, and things like that. And that I really find very significant. We shouldn't limit ourselves just to discussing decoloniality of knowledge, but decoloniality of praxis should become a particular component of that. Thank you very much for bringing that to the fore.
No, thank you so much. Right, and again, I think it's just, as I always tell my students, it's like who your audience is, and what's your agenda, what you're trying to do, and then adjust to it. Well, I want to thank all of you for this lovely conversation. Maybe we should have spoken just for 15 minutes, so we could have more time for conversation. With that.
Yes, thank you so much. Prof. Makoni, do you want to conclude?
What do I want to say? I think what I want to say is this. I want to read 2 paragraphs from a book that Ashraf and Christine Severo and I have just finished working on, writing, co-authoring, which is currently under review, because I think it touches on some of these issues. There are these 2 paragraphs. It says that decolonial thinkers must, from this point of view, go beyond decoloniality for the sake of decoloniality. If decolonization is to be effective, we need to be conceptually clear about what decolonization is for, stands for, or seeks to accomplish. For example, Frantz Fanon and Amilcar Cabral were clear conceptually and politically what decolonization would look like. In linguistics, we are arguing that decolonization entails reducing, to quote Salikoko Mfwene, the Western hold over the academy on how language across the globe are analyzed, and the tendency to fit the analysis of non-Western languages in a taxonomy originally meant for Western languages. The consideration of self-transcending decoloniality, which Lewis Gordon proposes, raises an important problem of what follows when decoloniality becomes an objective as opposed to a means. Without carefully reflecting on what decoloniality is for, it runs the danger of becoming a slogan with limited intellectual significance. For instance, fetishism and moralism appeal to models of purity. The need to go beyond decoloniality or to transcend decoloniality means being able to clearly articulate and depict the nature of the world which we are aspiring towards. For example, if the goal is to decolonize linguistics, it is necessary to describe the nature of the linguistics which we expect to emerge after it has been decolonized, and then the story goes on, etc., etc. Right. Anyway, thanks a lot to everybody. Now we are going to the section that is more exciting. It's unrecorded, it's unmoderated.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And I'm sorry to